just a few minutes to share with you some of the same slides I shared with the Board of Education and just give you an overview of where we are in our budget process. I hope that as we go through this, we'll have some questions at the end, and I can answer those questions and keep you on schedule. In fact, maybe ahead of schedule, because you're not going to see a lot different in our budget this year, in our budget request, than what we have requested in the past. Let's just start with a couple of successes, and these are things that we've talked about and you've probably read in our local newspaper and regional newspapers. One of the things I'm most proud about this school year is we developed a 5-year strategic plan. It's a strong plan, and we've involved a lot of people in our community. We've involved students and parents and people across the community. Our staff has been really involved in this, and we have a plan that we feel like will take our school system to the next step in the next 5 years. And, we're on a good path, but this will really keep us focused on what we need to be doing in our classrooms and across the school system to make our school system a national model. We've had a very successful year in our first year of our STEM Center at Davie High School. We've got about 140 students in the 9th grade in that center. We've got about the same amount coming up this next year, another cohort coming through. We're really excited about the partnership that we've developed with Wake Forest School of Medicine and CERTL to start a STEM middle school pipeline, a 7th grade pipeline starting this summer to really get students focused on science and technology, engineering and math. So that's going to be an exciting venture there. We're going to have a unique mix. We're selecting these students based on their predictability of success in biology in high school. So this is a pretty exciting venture and a model that has been used in other places successfully before. If you haven't noticed, we have a new website and communications tools, a new logo that you see around that focuses on innovation, achievement, and excellence. So that's pretty exciting as well. That's a new face of our school system. We announced this past year that we had the highest graduation rate since being recorded in the mid-2000s. And then this past week, we're notified by Newsweek that Davie County High School and Davie County Early College High School were 2 of 73 high schools in North Carolina that were included in Newsweek's 2013 America's Best High Schools list. So we're pretty proud of that. And when you look at that success, it's a result of success from pre-K through 12, through 13 if you count the 5th year of the early college high school. And we're ranked in the top of the state academically. When you look at where our students performed and their scale scores and their where they're ranking, we're right up there at the top. So really proud of the progress we're making as a school system. And our job and our opportunity is just to get better. We don't want to stand still and just rest on the success that we've had, but we're making strides to make our school system an even better place for students to learn and for people to work. So let's go over and let's review some of the trends that we're seeing in budget. This gives you a 10-year glimpse of our enrollment. Over the past 10 years, we stayed between 6,000 and 7,000 students. The highest point we were at was in 2008-9 with 6,740 students. This next year, our allotment from the state is based on 6,489, which is 6 students more than we had last year. So we're pretty flat as far as enrollment. And you saw the projections of the data that I sent you. Projections are that we'll be pretty flat in enrollment for the next while, except the fact that the demographics and the demographer made it very clear that if there are major changes in economic development, that enrollment could increase. And it may take us a couple of years to realize that. And we have seen some significant economic development announcements in Davie County, and that's a positive thing. So we hope that we'll see that trend go back up. But right now, we're pretty flat as far as our enrollment and our projected enrollment for next year. State budget. We're expecting or hoping that the state budget will be fairly flat for 13-14, but our benefit increases continue. Our health care contribution as an employer and our retirement contribution rate has gone up. You see here our hospitalization rate increased by $156 per employee. Our retirement contribution rate is now 15%. So over the past several years, we're spending $2 million more on employee benefits than we did in 2008-9. Now, for the folks that are paid on our state salary schedule and by the state funds that we receive, all those benefits are included in the state allotment. So so we don't have to worry about those. But when you see the dollar amount from state funds, you have to consider that a larger portion of that is now going toward employee benefits. We're anticipating the Senate will introduce their budget sometime this week, we hope. Final state budget until late in the summer. I know originally, talking with Speaker Tillis and people in the House, the original intent was for them to finish up by the end of May, 1st of June, and talking with Representative Howard on Friday morning when she was here in the community, she made a statement, we're hoping to get out by end of July, August, or September. So there's a lot of controversy within our legislature right now, and we're hoping that they will come together very quickly and develop a budget that they can agree upon and move our state forward. Our state economy, according to fiscal research of the General Assembly, continues to recover at a rate of 3 to 5% annually and is expected to continue to recover over the next few years. Just to give you an overview of our revenue sources, in Davie County schools, 62% of our revenue is from the state public school fund. We're heavily dependent upon state funding as a public school system. North Carolina ranks 11th in the nation, second in the Southeast for the highest percentage of funds from state revenue. The national average is only 45%. So most school districts in America have a different revenue stream than our school systems in North Carolina. 22.6% of our revenue is from local current expense and other special revenue funds that are specific to certain purposes. And you can see the other percentages there as well. That kind of gives you an idea of the money that goes into the school system. As far as our budget, we're an employee. Most of our budget is salaries and benefits. 80% of our budget is in salaries and benefits. So when we see a drastic reduction in revenue, it's hard for that not to affect employment of people. We have been very fortunate in Davie County as we've experienced the cuts over several years to be able to absorb those cuts through retirements and resignations. But what that means, other than we haven't had to do a reduction in force and lay people off, is it means that all of our other workers are picking up the load of those other people that are no longer employed, that we did not fill their position. Okay, my computer is thinking. Okay, so the budget crashed my computer, but we have a backup. Here, you take one of those passing. Beth will just pick up on the slide that's right there. Mark, you want to pass this to our board and Mr. Staff? Sorry about that. I haven't had that happen in a while. The next slide that you see here is a slide that I shared with you last year, and this is how our federal funding is determined. It's based on the percentage of students living in poverty. And last year, in 2012, Davie County schools ranked 12th lowest in the percentage of students living in poverty, 12th lowest among the 115 school districts in North Carolina. If you look on the next page, this is this year. In 2013, we're not ranked 12th lowest anymore, we're ranked 9th lowest. So as our poverty rate decreases in Davie, that will affect our federal funding. Primarily, the federal funding is in a lot of different categories, but there's two pretty big ones. Title I funding in our elementary schools based on poverty, and our exceptional children's program that serves our students with special needs. So when we see a change in the federal funding, that's going to be the two areas that would be affected the most. On the next slide, you will see a percentage of general fund of public school appropriations. This has been updated for this past year, and you'll see that back in 1970, 52% of the state's general fund was appropriated toward public education, K-12. And this past year it was 37.3, so we see a change in priorities at the state level. Let's go to the next page. I shared this slide with you last year, and it's just a basic ranking of per pupil expenses expenditures, and you'll see that North Carolina last year was ranked 42nd. On the next page, you will see a ranking that came out earlier, a couple months ago, that ranks North Carolina 48th. Now, what I would say about these two are, number one, they haven't been adjusted for cost of living. When you look at the highest funded school systems in America, like Alaska, New York, New Jersey, we know the cost of living is significantly different there than in Davie County, North Carolina. But it does show you where we rank as a state in per pupil expenditures. The next page is a chart that shows our percentage of expenditures by function in Davie County. And you will see in 2006, education was 29.8% of the county's budget revenue, and this past year it was 24.1%. You'll see the other functions that you also fund, such as human services and public safety, and the difference in funding there over time. So let's go to the next page and we'll take a little closer look at where we are. As I mentioned before, a lower poverty rate equals fewer federal funds. That's just a reality. That's a good problem for us to have. When you go to other parts of the state that are in much worse financial condition than we are, and have a much higher unemployment rate than we do, that's where those federal funds end up going to support education. The second bullet, higher spending does not produce better quality education. I believe that. I think I believe that. Higher education, quality education, is based on the quality of teachers that we employ. So what happens in our classrooms is more important than the bottom line of what we spend per student. And for us to maintain quality educators, we've got to be competitive, and that's extremely important. Number three there, education is budgeted differently and the cost of living varies across the nation. When you look at other states like Pennsylvania, other places that have, I believe Pennsylvania at one time had over 500 school districts for the state. Most were funded by local communities, and those local communities, based on their wealth, funded their school systems dramatically different. You may have a neighboring community that was extremely poor that had very low funding for schools, and right next door, a really high-funded public school system in that community. So in North Carolina, while we're heavily dependent upon the state, the quality of funding in the state is much closer, but it's getting farther apart as we go along. We're seeing communities that have high wealth really spending a lot more toward education. When you look at between here and Forsyth County, while they have a little advantage to us when it comes to their industrial ability to raise revenue industrially, they're spending about $600 per student more than we are. But our students are performing well, and I think that's something we should really be proud of. Bottom line, our citizens are getting an incredible return on investment for the amount of money that we're spending on public education. And I say there that public education is truly an investment. And it comes down to priorities of budget writers here, at our state level, and at the federal level as to how we fund public education. So let me give you three different scenarios and walk through those. Best case scenario is our teachers' salaries would be restored to the state salary schedule, and state employees are provided a cost of living increase. If you're a teacher in North Carolina and you enter in your first year, at the end of your fourth or fifth year, Deborah, you're still making the same amount of money. So we haven't seen a change there. The salary schedule needs to be adjusted in the state of North Carolina. We know that our teachers are funded at the lowest, a really low level compared to teachers across America. Funding for textbooks or digital resources, we're really seeing a trend of textbook dollars going away and putting more money toward digital resources. We hope that those monies will be restored from the state and we can move in that direction. There's a lot of people talking about what type of piece of glass do we put in front of students in the future that's easily updatable, that replaces the traditional textbook. Right now, the textbook publishers, when they're selling their digital content, are wanting as much or more for their digital content as they were for textbooks, which we know are a lot easier and cheaper to produce in digital format. So we're kind of in a real trend change here in public education and across America with digital resources. Professional development, technology monies are restored. and all the discretionary reductions are eliminated. This year, we will receive about $35 million from the state. We'll turn around and have to identify $1.6 million to return. That's considered their discretionary reduction. We're hoping that that will decline over time. And the current state economy is going to prohibit this scenario. We really don't foresee all those things coming back this budget year. Let's look at the next possible scenario. We have built our district budget this year based on a 1% salary increase. We have no idea what will happen at the end of this budget session between the two chambers, whether it will be a 1% increase, no increase, but we've built our budget based on a 1% salary increase. We are anticipating no additional state budget cuts, but our discretionary reduction went from 1.56 to 1.62 million. That's what we anticipate having to return this year. But again, I mean, everything I'm hearing from the legislature, gentlemen, is just, it's all over the map right now. We really don't know what's going to happen with the state budget. We will maybe get a little better idea once the Senate puts something on the table this week. We are hoping for no additional local budget cuts. We're requesting the same allotment of local funds as the past 4 years. We know that there are no additional federal stimulus or stabilization funding. We may have a decrease in federal funding. We're kind of anticipating that due to sequestration at the federal level. We just don't know where that's going to end up either. And with an $800,000 appropriation of fund balance, not filling some vacancies created through retirements and resignations, some other incremental cuts, we're going to be able to address the required reductions without any layoffs or reductions in force. That is a big if. And it just depends on where the state budget comes in at. Let me also pass this out. This is the budget message and the draft budget resolution adopted by the Board of Education. And in this is our draft, again, our draft resolution. But also as you thumb through that, starting on page 10, we started looking at what might be our potential revenues or allotments. Unfortunately, when you get a planning allotment before the governor's budget or the Senate's budget or the House's budget, it's really not worth the paper that we printed it on, because it will change. And I told the Board of Education, I said, one thing be assured, don't get used to this document, because it will change. We just don't know what the revenues will end up looking like. Basically, with 6 additional students, our position allotment went up half a teacher. If you start looking at the revenues that are necessary for our state funding positions, those are down because the average teacher salary in North Carolina is down. As people are retiring and new people are coming in, for the first 5 years, they're at the lowest point of the salary scale. So it's taking fewer dollars to pay for teachers in North Carolina. So you can see there some best guesses, but you can be assured that all these numbers will change over time as we get a final budget. We've also included in this document, starting on page 13, our capital outlay budget request, the board approved with our technology projects and other capital building projects, capital repairs throughout the school system. And if you can, let's go on over to page 17. Always been a lot of questions about the school system's fund balance. I want to go over that and share with you where we are with school system fund balance. At the top of this page, you'll see unrestricted fund balance, and in the first column there, starting with June 2010, you'll see the current expense unrestricted fund balance of $1.765 million. In 2011, that fund balance went to $4.5 million. That's when we started receiving the federal stimulus money. The plan was laid out. I wasn't here at the time, but I understand the plan was laid out to build fund balance and to spend that down as the state economy recovered. That has been the plan and continues to be the process the school system has been through over the past several years. So in June 30, 2011, fund balance was $4.5 million. June 30, 12, 3.68 million. June 30, 2013, our estimated current expense unrestricted fund balance will be $2.7 million. So you can see how we spent that down each year. If you move on down, we developed a policy at the recommendation of the Evergreen report this past year. We developed a fund balance policy, and it's included in your packet as well. And it's based on our current expense budget. So if our current expense budget draft is $10.6 million, $10,597,000, you'll see that number there. And our current estimated fund balance at the end of June is $2.7 million. If you back out the 17% of the current expense budget, 1.8, 1% stabilization, just over 100,000, that's about $1.9 million that our policy calls for us to keep in fund balance at any given time. If you look at our projected fund balance at the end of June, and you back out that 1.9, that leaves $823,402 available for appropriation. The Board of Education is appropriating $800,000 of that in this budget. So that would leave, if these estimates are correct, at the end of next year, that would leave $23,402 available for future appropriation. I shared with the board, you have two choices. We could eliminate positions this year and not use $800,000 in fund balance, or we could continue to execute the plan that was in place, use the fund balance that was created with the federal stimulus money, keep all of our employees employed for another year. We're successful. The things that we're doing are working. Why would we want to upset the apple cart at this point and lay people off when we're not forced to do that? Because if we look at next year, as the state economy recovers, we have a $1.6 million discretionary reduction that we have to send back to the state. If the state would just cut that in half, we're at a balanced budget. We wouldn't have to dip into fund balance. So that's what we anticipate and what we hope will happen over time. If next year we're at this point again, with the state still requesting a $1.6 million discretionary reduction, then we have to make some adjustments in our budget. But why would we go do that with a school system that's working as well as ours is if we're not forced to do that? So that's where we are with spending down the fund balance that was built based on the federal stimulus money, and kind of where we are anticipating to be next year. And we're hopeful that the legislature will follow through and will begin eliminating the discretionary reduction as they have promised. The last page is our worst case scenario. And our worst case scenario is that the Senate and the House would adopt a budget similar to what the governor proposed in cutting the teacher assistant allotment. The governor's budget, right now, teacher assistants in Davie County and every other school system across the state are funded based on our enrollment in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. The governor's budget funds teacher assistants based on kindergarten and first grade. And when it was first announced, it sounded to us that they were going to increase the teacher allotment and decrease the teacher assistant allotment. That's how the media originally reported this. That's not actually the case. The governor built in his budget additional teachers for growth in North Carolina. So school systems that were growing exponentially in high growth areas would get more teachers based on their projected enrollment. But in Davie County, if our enrollment's flat, we would not be getting additional teachers. It would just be a cut to the teacher assistant allotment. If you've watched, I've been through a lot of budget cycles in public schools over a number of years. Several years ago, the Senate started saying some of the same things about cutting the teacher assistant allotment. I don't know if it's a shell game, if it's a political move to put something on the table that's really ridiculous and be able to pull it off during the budget process, if it's an exchange somewhere, but it's been talked about a lot before. I'm hoping that this is not a reality that we're facing, because I understand when you look at the performance of students in Davie County, we can point back to the help that we get from teacher assistants in those early grades to help children read and to help them progress and move forward. So I'm hoping that our legislature will not take the governor's lead on that, and that this is just a political process and something that will be taken off the table. So worst case scenario, we would have to go back and look at our teacher assistant allotment and make adjustments there. Worst case scenario, if we had local budget cuts on top of the cuts at state level and loss of funding at the federal level, if we had those things in place, we would have to go back and further reduce employment of staff. The next page is local budget request comparisons. I mentioned to you before, and in my budget message, I hope you will have time to read. This is a budget request comparison that we put together as we polled counties surrounding Davie and what they were requesting from boards of county commissioners. And this year, Davidson County is requesting a 3% increase, Forsyth a 1% increase, Iredell a 19% increase, Rowan 15% increase, Yadkin 10% increase. Will those folks receive that from their county commissioners? Probably not. But we feel like we've come to you with a very reasonable request. We have the same amount of students as we've had this past year, and we're requesting the same amount of funding. So our request, we feel like, is in line with the reality of the situation that we're all in Davie County. We're being respectful to you and the position that we're in, and we hope that you continue to fund our school system as you have in the past at the same level. Our next steps is the last page. The Board of Education has approved the budget draft you have in front of you. We're presenting this to you this morning for your consideration. We're still waiting for our federal planning allotments, our local allotment from you, our adjusted state allotment. So we're in a holding pattern. Right now, the plan is we don't anticipate cutting additional positions. We don't anticipate hiring additional positions. We have what we have today, and we're hoping to hold on to what we have today, because what we have today is working, and it's working really well. So we're requesting the same local allotment of just over $9.5 million as we've been allocated for the past 4 years. And with that, I will open it up to any questions you might have.
Dr. Hartness, do you have any estimated time frame on the federal allotment issue? I mean,
We don't. You know, I'm hoping that we'll get some federal planning allotments here in the next week or two. But since the federal, well, we know what's happening in the news. We see the sequestration issues that have been, talked about for some time. Who knows what that timeline looks like? If there's any good news to this, Mr. Jones, is that we're less dependent upon federal money in Davie County because of our low poverty ranking than most other school systems. So as far as a big swing in funding, we're not going to be in the same situation as some other school districts that have high poverty.
So you don't expect it to have a major impact?
Any cut in federal will have an impact, but again, it will be primarily in those two areas I mentioned before. In Title I funding in elementary schools and exceptional children's funding for students with special needs. Those are the two biggest pots of money in federal. It's a good question. I think you all know the frustration that you have and that we have with the budget timeline of me coming to you with a budget request and not knowing what the rest of our budget looks like from the other revenue sources we have. But we're doing it as prescribed by the law. I'm supposed to be here before May the 15th to present to you, and that's what we're doing.
Well, it's frustrating for all of us.
Sure.
Any other questions? I was just going to address the issue of $800,000 out of reserves, but you've answered it.
But you guys ahead of schedule, Mr. Whiteside.
We might get a break here.
You might get a break. You might get less than 14 hours this year. Thank you very much. If you have further questions, please let me know.